This podcast is brought to you by JMC Academy, Australia's leading creative education provider. With degrees in film, acting, entertainment management, design, music, audio engineering, animation, and game design, JMC has a course for every type of creative. Search JMC Academy to learn more.
Today we are at JMC Sydney speaking to Australian royalty. Tim Minchin sells hundreds of thousands of tickets across the UK, has won countless awards. He's a comedian, musician, actor, Broadway composer, director, doing everything from writing the music to the huge hit Matilda the musical, to more recently starring in Disney Plus's The Artful Dodger. Tim is one of the most talented musicians, period. He is a musician's musician. Daniel Johns told me that if there were ever going to be a Silverchair musical, the only person he would want to do it would be Tim Minchin. This extraordinary musicianship, paired with Tim's lyricism and ability to make us laugh while also making us think, makes it impossible to deny that Tim is truly a once-in-a-generation talent. Tim, welcome.
Wow. Thanks. I better not be super boring on the podcast then. I can probably be super boring because you've just bigged me up so much.
So, when I heard Daniel Johns say that, I've got to ask you, is a Silverchair musical ever on the cards?
Well, the trouble with that is I'm quite good at writing music and lyrics for musicals, and the last thing Silverchair needs is someone else writing their music and lyrics, you know. I mean, that musical, I don't not love them. I think it's important to draw a distinction. I wish there were totally different names for jukebox musicals and what I do, because people are, I don't like musicals. I saw Mamma Mia, it was dumb. And it's like, yeah, but okay. Like Mamma Mia contains some of the best songs ever written, but it's not a great example of a piece of musical theatre structurally or whatever. And then now we've got what I call TikTok musicals, which don't even use whole songs that other people have written, but just little bits of them. So like Moulin Rouge and shit. So I wish we had different words for them. But when it comes to jukebox musicals built on the back catalogue of a particular artist or band, the best ones for me are the biography ones. So Jersey Boys or the Buddy Holly story back in the day, when you're actually telling the story of the artist. And the Silverchair musical would be amazing. And Daniel writes he's so good and so sort of operatic. It's melodrama often, so it would suit the form. It could be traumatic. I think it would just reignite trauma for Daniel, and I don't think anyone wants to do that. So make some money for him, though. Money solves everything, kids.
We're going to get to money later because that's my biggest passion. But
You're paying me?
Can we start with where it started for you? Because you moved from Perth to Melbourne, and it didn't work for a long time. You did your own shows, you toured with other people, and you were on the record at saying, fuck it, I'm going to give it one more year, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to go get a job. Now, that is counter to all of the follow your dreams narratives and never give up and all that sort of stuff you always hear. You drew a line in the sand. Now, thankfully, that year worked for everybody, especially for you, but for everybody, we all got to enjoy it, and I'm really thankful for that. But what is your advice to people who, sometimes you've got to know when to pivot your dream? Like, what is your advice for that? Because that's a really interesting counter advice that you sort of adopted for yourself at that time.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, this question alone is the hour, if that was what we wanted to say. It's such a big discussion, and like everything, it's complicated. There's no banner that can give you the right. There's no fridge magnet that'll give you the right advice. Firstly, there's some mythology. When things go well for an artist, people build linear mythology. Literally, I've had 3 documentaries made about me. One which was made during that year, and it suited the documentarian. She's a dear friend and an amazing storyteller, but it didn't suit the story of the documentary to dig. The best thing to say was, he was on the bones of his ass and about to give up, and then Edinburgh, And that there's truth in it, but it's also, I was earning, doing lots of cashies and, playing a lot of different gigs and enjoying my life, and we were on the bones of our ass, but happy. And yes, there was a bit of me that thought, what am I doing? I could be a really good teacher, or there must be other things than, when I was on stage at 29 playing keyboards in a cover band at a pub, and I thank God for those boys and that band because it kept my rent paid, but I did think, is this the best thing I can do with my mind? But I think actually a little bit the opposite is true. I think that year I had got to the point of like, you know what? I think this is what I'd do. Not keyboards in a cover band, but writing music and making theatre and, I think I'll just be poor and do this. And actually maybe that acquiescence, maybe that, look, I'm an artist for good or ill, maybe that is the more interesting correlate with everything going well. I suspect the correlate has no causality. It's just luck. I was 29 and I'd done a lot of work and I'd got some chops and I was ready to go. But I really admire artists who go really hard at it and then pivot, because I don't actually believe art is the most important thing in the world. I think it's absolutely vital cumulatively. I think the world without art is dead, because art is culture and culture is the accumulation of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and shared narratives are the only reason 8 billion people on the planet mostly get along pretty well. So art is important, but any one artist, are they more important than any one doctor or any one, biomedical engineer or any one teacher? I don't particularly think so. So this idea that it's art or bust, I think, is poisonous, actually, because it leaves a lot of people feeling like failures. And it's just... And then what is art? What is being an artist? You start being a muso and then realize your gift is in sound design, and you might end up in advertising, or a really great music teacher, and all that is as valid and probably will lead to a happier life than becoming a massive star. Like, statistically, will definitely end up in a happy life. So yeah, I think we need to undo some of that stuff.
And when you were saying, I'm happy to just do this and be poor the rest of my life,
Yeah.
how did your wife feel about that?
Well, she was happy too. I mean, I think that's a big, extraordinary part of my story, is that I met Sarah when we were 17. We broke up for a couple of years when we were 19, but I basically had this cat in my life the whole time, and she's just kind of preternaturally designed to be like, she loves me and she loves my work, but she's not like an adoring fan. Some people who are artists and their partner's like behind you, go show them you're amazing. And my wife's like, well, if people don't like it, then you probably should fix it or something. Like, if I ever get a bad review, she goes, well, obviously they saw something that wasn't very good. Like, she's super like that. But on the other hand, she's just like, oh, okay, well, you're a muso. And also, I always had the benefit or the luck of being multifaceted. So I could go and write a little score for a youth theatre thing, and I could play in a cover band, or I could do a jazz gig at a thing, or I could do Shakespeare in the Park and play, some minor character who also sits under the tree and plays the wooden flute or whatever that character is, Fabian. And so I don't think I was going to end up unemployable. I think I was always going to find a career in the arts, but I'm not everyone, and it's all fucking luck. So
All right, so let's diagnose the luck, because you got this. You did this
That's
thing
another
called,
hour.
You did this thing called Matilda.
Yeah.
It was ridiculously successful, stupidly successful. How did you get that gig?
There's luck. Well, Matilda, there's lots of interesting stuff there, and if you're inclined to believe in fate, you'll find this affirms your misbelief. But when I was in Perth around the turn of the century, that was the most recent turn of the century, 2000. I was writing for youth theatre and amateur theatre and stuff, and I spent a lot of years just writing a lot of stuff for free, because it never crossed my mind that anyone has a right to be an artist. So I did a lot of just what do you call it, collective, sort of stuff, and I was writing a little bit for tiny money for a kids theatre company called Barking Gecko, and I actually wrote to the Dahl estate because I can't remember why, but it got into my head that Matilda would make a good musical, and I wrote to the Dahl estate. And I have no evidence of this. I can't find the email. It was a very early email, saying who has the rights to Matilda. I'd like to make it into a musical, and I got this sort of formal letter back that said, "Dear Mr. Minchin, we are interested in the exploitation of Roald's intellectual property in theatrically. Please send us a sample of your score and we'll consider it." And I was like, "No, I was going to spend like I did with the previous show. I think the one before was 1,001 Nights. I spent 4 weeks, wrote 10 songs, recorded them, put it on, got paid $1,500 and moved on. I didn't, and then that's in the bin. I don't know where 1,001 Nights is. It's just in the bin. You just write it and do it and move the fuck on." So I was in that headspace, and they were sort of going, "Yes, we'd like to hear your offer." And I'm like, I can't write music. I can't send a score. What the fuck's a score? So I just moved on. And then 8 years later, I get called to a meeting by Matthew Watchus, who I'd never heard of, and I was too lazy to Google, who happened to have already won 2 Tony Awards, and was sort of famously taciturn, quiet, sort of contained English director. And I got this meeting at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I thought maybe they found out about my Shakespeare in the Park, maybe they want me to play Fabian and sit under a tree out in Stratford, I was quite excited because I was getting a name by then. And he said, "Have you ever heard of Matilda?" And I'm like, "This is a Royal Shakespeare Company meeting. Why are we talking about, have you ever heard of Roald Dahl?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Have you ever heard of Matilda?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Have you ever thought about writing a musical?" And I'm like, "I've probably written 12, 14 scores, I guess." When I say scores, I mean, on Logic. And he went, "Well, we're going to, the playwright Dennis Kelly is helping us adapt Matilda for a musical, and we are interested in you writing the songs." And I went, "Well, you're not going to get me to write it because I can't even write dots, and you must have a million proper composers. But these are the ways you're going to fuck up Matilda. These are the ways you're going to ruin Dahl by Disneyfying it. And whoever you get, don't let him do that." And by the time I walked out, Matthew had apparently got on the phone and went, "Is this guy or I'm out?"
Oh, that's amazing.
He had already been to my show. He had seen all my clever, but also had cried at White Wine in the Sun and had gone, "Oh, okay, he can do it." So, but then I sent him like 10 demos of stuff I had done. And in fact, I wrote a musical called with Kate Mulvaney called Somewhere, the magical musical of Penrith, on the occasion of the opening of the new Joan Southern Performing Arts Centre in Penrith. I'm probably pointing in the wrong direction. Only 2 years before, in 2006. And I was paid a bit more then. I was paid I can't remember, but reasonable money, like 10 grand or something, to write a full musical about Penrith. And the opening number, I stole the whole thing, and that's the opening of Matilda.
So, what I'm gathering from that meeting, either one or two things happened. You thought you had no chance of getting the job, or you actually kind of didn't care if you got it or not. Is that which one was it? I mean, to me, if you're desperate for if you have all your eggs in one basket and you're desperate for an opportunity, you're very unlikely to get it.
I think that's true. Yes, and there's probably you've got to be careful about trying to second guess what people want. There's so much mythology about how to approach a job interview and stuff. And that's also something when I went and did 2 years of a sort of what was called commercial music certificate at Whopper in the 90s. There's a lot of talk about how you can make it in the industry if you get your business cards right. And we had business cards back then, and and how to have meetings. And there was a big attempt to create structure around how to make it that kind of masked the reality, which is that you make art, you hit an audience or you don't, be good. And you're not going to hit an audience if you sit in your bedroom. I guess that's. But in terms of my attitude, I was on tour, And in fact, when they did offer me the job, I didn't very nearly, but for a minute I went, should I be going back to writing children's musicals? It was just going to be a Christmas show in Stratford. They said it will, and again, it wasn't good money. I mean, there's a contract that said if this transfers, you get a percentage for the rest of its life, and that's why I have a house. But there wasn't a big advance. It wasn't a big commission fee, and it was going to be 10 weeks in Stratford. And I did think, and I was on the up, and I was like, the year before I'd done like a tour of little art centres, and this year I was doing 500 seaters all around England, and I was getting known as a comedian, and I was on the Jonathan Ross show, and I was like, I'm going to be a fucking rock star. Why would I go make children's theatre? And then I thought, it's Royal Shakespeare Company, you just don't say no, right?
So, talking about hitting audiences, Matilda hit massive in Broadway, and it did super. It was based set in England, did great in Broadway. Then it went over to England, did great there too.
Oh no, we went Stratford to West End, and it's been running for 14 years and still sells out 8 times a week. And it went to Broadway for 4 years, where it did okay, but it was suffered under Broadway being a bunch of pieces of it's Broadway is like, you called it a Broadway musical and I almost immediately interrupted you. It's not a Broadway musical, it's a British musical. Broadway is like, we can talk about Broadway.
Let's talk about it.
Well, Broadway and Hollywood are like, America has a ruthlessness in the way it does business because there's just so much money to earn, and it's scary. It's culturally a bit different. It's not very gentle personally. It's like, leaking lies to the press to try and about how we're treating the kids to undermine our Tonys campaign, because a Tony is worth $10 million for Best Musical.
Oh.
And then when you do, and other stuff as well, and we weren't flawless in our thing, but yeah, I mean, Kinky Boots won Best Musical that year.
I mean,
it's a great musical.
So this is the interesting, right? Because you wrote this song, "I'm Leaving LA."
Oh yeah.
And you obviously didn't like LA. If you hear the song, you left it. You're speaking on you didn't like Broadway.
I like Broadway and I loved LA. I think that song shows a deep love for the place. It's like a breakup song with someone you like, want to leave but kind of love. Yeah.
Okay.
And I love Broadway. It's just the business. In both those places, I love the towns, I love the people, I love the artists, I love the unbelievable passion of the practitioners, I love the tradition of excellence, I love the celebration of excellence. It just gets corrupted at the business end.
And there is that lyric in the
anus.
There is that lyric in the song. There is that lyric in the song where you say they're taking 10% in their sneakers and suits.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing it.
That's you.
Could be me. In a past life, it was me. Yes, it was. Actually, I'm a talent manager. But tell me, what is your relationship like with the business of the entertainment?
Quite good. I'm certainly not naive, or never have been. I think my 10 years of struggling and the fact that every agent in Australia said no to me, and every record company in Australia said no to me, and all that, when you've gone through that, I was and being West Australian and being very, very inclined to question all mythologies, and it's just how I'm educated and how my brain works. I was more suspicious than I needed to be, I think. As in, when things started going well for me, people like, let me manage you, here's an advance, here's a DVD deal. And I was just like, what are you trying to fuck with me? And they're like, no, you're amazing, you're going to be a star. And I'm like, you're going to be a star? Like, what do you think I am, an idiot? Like, look at me, I'm not going to be a star. Just tell me where the work is and tell me how you're going to help me do the work. Don't tell me you're going to get me a nice car, when actually those people genuinely thought I was going to have a big career and genuinely, A, yes, wanted to be a part of it, but B, were in the industry because that's what excited them. I mean, you were artist manager. I mean, when you saw a young artist that you loved, I bet you didn't just think, here's the money. You were thinking, this kid's amazing, I want to be a part of that. And yeah, that's my living, but I'm inspired by this. And I thought they were all exploitative, and I was absolutely wrong about that. but it held me in pretty good stead. My cautiousness held me in reasonable stead, but it's taken me years to be more trusting, and I've still got a big chip on my shoulder about some stuff.
It's super interesting because I think your suspicion is both correct and wrong at the same time.
Yeah,
So you have,
I think that's right.
I mean, an artist manager is the ultimate music or artist fan. Like it
Yeah.
is like you are so obsessed with this person that you just want to help and be a part of it and build the business with them. Like that is
Yeah.
the ultimate sign of devotion.
Yeah.
Now, in its purest sense, the problem is you get there's no barrier to entry to be an artist manager. Anyone with a laptop and can speak
Yeah.
can say I'm a manager and I'm going to help you and I'm
Yeah.
going to make calls. And so you get one of two. You attracts two types of negative people to the industry: incompetence, people who just aren't very good, and people who aren't actually fans and are pretending to be fans, and so they take advantage of it. And you see all the stuff in the bad news, and so you see all the bad news in the news.
Yeah.
And so
there's a reason we get suspicious as artists.
yeah,
you
this
feel
is-
exploited. But
totally.
you got to dance with it. And I don't mean you got to dance with the devil. I just mean it's a dance. You can't do a career without that. Here's a metaphor. I'm renovating this house that I got because of Matilda. I'm renovating a house. I'm 48 and I'm finally getting to make a home my own, and I think we're going to stay there. And it's actually a really amazing thing, and I never take that shit for granted. And this is beautiful architect, and the architect has a perverse incentive, as does the builder, which is that the more it costs to build that house, the more they get paid. They get paid a percentage of the build cost. And I know for young people, you're going, what the hell are you talking about? But it's the same with management. That it's not in that it's not the same model, but it's the same in that architects are artists too, and they're passionate. They want my home to be really beautifully done, and they want to support Sarah and my vision for our little, whatever, courtyard. But also, if they convince us to buy the really expensive window frame, then they get more money. And it's the same, but that doesn't mean they're not passionate and it's not coming from the right place. So I don't know how to unpack all that. When you've got a manager who's like, I think you should do this job, and you're like, well, of course you do, because that's the big paying one. You want to find a manager who's like, what do you want to do? Let me support you. And that takes time. They have to learn to trust you, and you have to trust them. I don't know. I think obviously this is too long an answer, but you have to give over faith. You don't need to be as chippy as I was, but you just got to be smart. You just got to make sure you got your eyes on the potential perverse incentives. What is that the right phrase I'm using? Adverse incentives?
I think it comes down to aligned vision. So if your manager is in it to build a long-term career, then they're not going to be incentivized for you to take the shitty little job that might actually damage your long-term equity. They're going to want to build something generational so that they can be rewarded generationally as well.
Yeah.
And if you are in a manager who just needs to fucking get paid that month, then he's going to encourage you to take the shit.
And if
gig.
he's got 100 clients, he's just like, just keep them all earning money.
Exactly.
And if I lose 20 clients, then fine, because I'll get 20 more.
Yeah.
That's when you're an actor. When you're an actor, there's a different conversation there. And in fact, all these things we've talked about, it is different when you're not generating the IP. When you're actors are, the hard thing about acting is you have to wait for someone else to tell you you're allowed to work, and that's a whole other conversation.
So let's talk about the house that Matilda built. How does the economics of theatre work? How do you get paid? What is the income streams from that kind of art?
I won't necessarily go too much into it, but it's basically I own the rights to the songs perpetually, but and I'm not very good at this stuff. As it falls out, wherever Matilda is performed, depending on whether it's the primary production or a replica production, of which there's been many, or it's a secondary production, which like a school doing Matilda Junior, and there's lots of different structures. But basically, every time anyone buys a ticket for Matilda anywhere of any version, some of that will go to me. And when I say some of it, I mean a tiny, tiny bit, but it's a buttload of tickets. So it's owning IP as an artist is the most amazing thing. And I didn't aim for that. I didn't know musical theatre could solve your problems, but it's like any gamble. The thing with musical theatre is they mostly flop, to use the Broadway false binary of hit and flop. They mostly don't make their money back, but everyone wants to make one because when they hit, everyone gets comfy, because, I mean, 8 shows a week, 1,100 people a show, that's just the West End for 14 years. Even if I get pennies, which is pretty much what it is, certainly, it's a good thing. I mean, and this is when people ask me advice about my career, like, how do I have a career like yours? You're just like, it's like saying, how do I roll a green at the roulette wheel? You just throw the freaking ball, man. Like, I have no advice, but but if you write a good musical, you can pay your bills. Yeah.
Well, I think the advantage of your career is that you are so brilliant at so many things. So I think that would have worked against you in the early days, because it's like, what are you, a comedian, a musician? Like, where the fuck do I work? And that's
definitely.
why probably agents didn't want to work with you, because they didn't know how
Without
to work
a doubt,
with you.
I would go and say, I do this, this, and this, and they're like, yeah, everyone says that.
Can you just pick one?
Yeah. They're just looking at me going, would you look good on the beach in Neighbours? Ginger weirdo.
Yeah. So I imagine, yes, that would have made your life very difficult at the start. But then what it did mean was that you had more bets at the casino, and you were able to just continue to do lots of different things, and then eventually you did have a hit.
Absolutely. That's right. And also, and I don't want to seem trite, but it is the only lesson, is I happen to be born with a brain that likes to try and get good at things and has the capacity to do so, and not everyone does. And I don't even know what talent means. I don't think I'm a particularly naturally musical person. That must sound absurd given I'm untrained and relatively untrained, but I don't feel like one of those cats, I play with people and they're just fucking so musical. Their choices and their ears and their groove and they're so musical. And I didn't grow up with much music in the house. I didn't really listen to any jazz till I was 18. For me, it's more like a fetish. It's like music for me is like, I'm very interested in stuff. Music to me is like, oh, cool. I wonder if I could, and part of the I wonder if I could is I wonder if I could play blues scales twice as fast as this and maybe a girl will kiss me. It's like that sort of like, it's like showy offy, and my stuff's obviously quite showy offy, and I love getting in amongst stuff and dissecting a story and talking. My favourite thing about writing Matilda or Groundhog Day is when we're all in a room going, but, where is she at that point? Like, why would she sing that? Like, because this has happened, and you're just sitting in the space of a character, or you're sitting at home alone and you think, I'm going to write a song about what it's like to be in a monogamous relationship but wanting to shag other people, because no one talks about that. But I want to make it really romantic as well as really realistic. And that sort of, the fact that it's all a puzzle, that's what drives me, right? And so you say I'm really good at lots of things, and I in some ways I can take a step back and go, yeah, I don't feel good at things, but I'm not stupid. Like, I've obviously done all right at some things. But it's just, you got to be into it, and you can't be into it if you're not into it, and you're sure as shit not going to get anywhere if you're thinking about the end point, and you've got some goal where you think you're going to just do lines of cocaine off the back of a, horse or whatever, and I'm gonna have my name in lights, and you hear that all the time from Americans. I always knew I was gonna have my name in lights. It's like, you want your fucking name in lights? What's the path to having your name in lights? Just go to the hardware and buy enough light globes. What do you mean? Like, what do you mean you thought you were gonna? I grew up in Perth. I didn't think I'd have my name on the front of a pub. It's just, you just got to care about the craft, and not even and try to remove that from feeling competitive with other people's version of what the craft is. And I've just gone down a cul-de-sac. I don't know what I'm saying, but you just got to be into it, right?
Tell me, what is the most rewarding creative work you've done?
It totally changes for me because because your lens changes all the time, and your feelings about a thing when you're in it are so different from. I've got this photo exhibition that's just of photos of me over the last 6 years, which sounds weird, but it's an amazing photographer called Damien Bennett who's just been hanging around. And I was looking at those photos yesterday, and I feel like that's another person, right? And Damien said to me, look at this photo, and it's me on the stage of the Sydney Opera House steps on the afternoon of a concert, right? So this is 3 hours before 5,000 people are going to turn up and watch me play. And I had a set of songs. I know people come expecting me to be funny, but I had no talk. I was just going to get on stage in front of 5,000 people and just say what came into my head. And I'm standing in this photo, like my eyes closed. I'm like this. I'm like, look like I'm just in ecstasy of music. And I've got my 3 horn players around me and they're all fucking grooving. We're practicing a bit, obviously. And he's like, Damien said, I love these moments where you're just immersed in the joy of it. And I'm like, oh, no, that was the afternoon of an Opera House step show where I didn't know what I was going to say. That is me trying to remind myself that I am a musician when my brain is saying, you're a fucking talentless, fat, stupid, like, not, sorry, that's a bit dramatic, but your brain, but almost, it's just like, you're not good enough for these 5,000 empty chairs. You're going to, you can't, is that a cold I've got coming? You know, like the difference between what it looks like my life is like and what my life is like is huge. And one does that to oneself. So you self-mythologize in hindsight and go, oh yeah, those gigs were awesome. And touring with the band was so much fun. And you delete all the stuff where it's like, if I have to sleep on this bus tonight, I'm going to have a, you know. I think my favorite things are collective creativity, which is interesting because I'm quite controlling, but working with Dennis and Matthew, or Danny and Matthew, on the 2 musicals, those early days of going, this story can be anything, what is it? That is joyous. And similarly with Upright, those early days of going, oh, what if when he gets there, then so I was like, yeah, but I mean that pure blank canvas, well, not pure blank canvas, but you've got some structure and you're building onto it with a group of people who are enrolled in your passion. That's the gold.
And so, did you do much collaboration for your debut record?
Well, my band at that point we've been playing together for a little while, and yeah, Jack and everyone creatively input, but certainly as a songwriter, I've never written any song with anyone else anywhere near it. Like I can't be in the room. I can't have anyone anywhere near me.
Why did it take you to your 40s to release your debut album?
No one wanted it, you know, that's not what my audience wanted. I had to get to the point where I was like, fuck what my audience wants, so I want to make a record. I've been writing songs since I was 11 or something, and I guess I made a record in my lounge room when I was 22, and 15 tracks in 3 days, and that's all right. I'm playing one of those songs on stage at the moment, actually. Yeah, I tried to get record deals and I got really good feedback, but yeah, it never really happened. And then suddenly I was in Melbourne, and then suddenly I was doing comedy, and then suddenly 10 years had gone by, and I kept going, I'm going to make a record. But it is a bit, when you're like me, I'm obsessed by expansion, not in a business sense, but in an artistic sense. I'm obsessed by going, I want to play Judas, and I want to write a book, and I want to, you know. And at some point, that's going to be hubris, right? That's going to be self-indulgent wank. If I go, oh, I want to paint, I'm going to do an exhibition of my paintings. If that happens, you give me a call, right, and come around and punch me in the face, because that's hubris, because I can't paint. But I'm quite proud of that record. I mean, it's not for everyone, but I think I'm an all right songwriter, and I had to wrestle my right to write songs off my comedy career. That's been the story of the last 10 years. Is like, you know, I don't want to sound, this sounds unbelievably niche complaint, but when you've written, you know, Matilda's the most successful British musical this century, and still in England in the press, I say Matilda written by comedian Tim Minchin, and I just want to go, do you think a comedian, someone who's primarily a comedian, wrote Matilda? Like, go and have a listen to it. I'm not a fucking comedian. I'm a composer in that regard. And it's just like trying to extract my sense of being a legitimate songwriter and musician from my comedy career has been, it's not something anyone else needs to worry about, but it's something that has been a project for me. And I've won. I think I've done it, but it's been a hell of a thing, especially in England. It's like, I keep going, here's another piece of work that's legitimate and not satire, and just keep doing it and keep doing it. And one day they'll drop comedian off the front of my name. Call me.
Does this mean you're done with satire? You're not going to do that anymore?
Well, my songs always are my songs, you know. But I mean, I haven't written a comedy song for 14 years.
Yeah.
I went dark side to arenas with a symphony orchestra in 5 years and stopped. Apart from George Pell and the Sydney Opera House song and my activism stuff, that's satire for the sake of progress or a political statement or whatever. I mean, Groundhog Day is full of comedy songs, but it'll always be in my work. But no, I had stopped, you know. I mean, no one noticed, but I stopped. I went from 10,000 seaters to not touring for 7 years because I don't want to be trapped being a comedian. I went to LA and tried to make an animated film.
Yes.
Mad move.
Well, I think I want to flip it because I've heard you speak about this film a few times in interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always like, oh, it fucking sucks. Like, we spent all this time on it.
Yeah.
Company got bought, then they scrapped it. And
Yeah.
and I'm like, how many people get paid to work on a failure?
Yeah.
Like, you got paid to do that.
I got paid, and not only that, when Universal bought DreamWorks, they got their lawyers to try and not pay me out because I was on a pay or play deal. Like, so when they shut the film down, they had to also pay me out. You know, I don't think it was a huge amount of money, but they tried to scrape it back.
Yeah.
Fuckers. Absolute bitches. But this is the thing, right? And there's a bigger conversation about your values and the kind of hopelessness of someone like me speaking to young artists. There is a huge shift that comes that makes everything I say, you've got to take it all with a grain of salt. The good thing about me is I'm aware of it, and not all artists are, and not all people are. I mean, I'm so aware of my privilege. I mean, you have to understand, I don't believe in free will. So when I say everything's luck, I believe I'm an emergent entity at the end of an unbroken causal chain that started at the Big Bang, and I don't believe anyone actually chooses anything. But taking that into account, I don't have a problem knowing my privilege. The thing is, I didn't give a shit. I could have earned a lot more money touring funny songs. I went to LA because I believed a Australian Lion King, a $90 million animated film about a kangaroo and a bilby trying to get across the outback to restore the royal albatross to its throne, like an epic thing about kindness and bravery and leaping into the unknown. And even in that era, it was already unusual to be telling boys' stories. I have a passionate belief that you can revolutionize the world and tell more female stories and more minority stories and without deleting. I think stopping telling boys' stories is a terrible idea. I think men are already the main problem in the world, so let's not stop telling stories about how to be a good man. So it was also a boys' own adventure, which was unusual. The songs are fucking banging. It's like when I look at the Red Beret girl doing Revolting Children, I'm like, oh man, if those kids have heard, I'm an animal and I go balls to the wall, there's always fights to be fought, there's no time for whining at all. If they had heard all that, they would have gone ballistic. I cared about the story. I cared about the script. Harry Cripps, my friend. I cared about the artists from all over the world. I cared about I at no point did I look at what the checks going into my bank account were. I was so disinterested in the money. So when I had this meeting when they shut the film down, I'm like, dude, you got paid, and I'm like, I took a pay cut to come here. What are you talking about? I got paid. You think I'm here to get paid? I'm here to make a bilby sing for the first time in cinematic history. Like, come on, what do you think? I don't need to get paid, you bitches. So yes, it's a very, very different. It's a wonderful place to get to where I really don't think about where the money is. I think about where my next challenge is and where I can put good ideas into the world and make people happy. And yes, I get, and knowing that if I do that well because of where I've ended up in my life, I'll get paid. And that's, I cannot overstate how much I understand that's a bullshit place to arrive at. And can you imagine? I'm fucking little Perth weirdo. Like, it's
Can
amazing.
I ask, is there any way to save it? Like, can we get it
Oh,
funded?
I don't think so. I mean, they really put it in the bin because
Can't somebody else buy it though?
yeah, they can, but they made it unaffordable, deliberately unaffordable, because if it went and got made, and the people who shut it down will look like idiots if it's a success. So they make sure it's like basic. So lots of studios were interested in Netflix and Animal Logic and stuff, but it was, look, and I could literally get sued for slander here, so I'm not sure, but I think it's just, we'd spent 45 million on it or something. It needed another 45, or, let's say 40 million. It needed another 45. So whoever inherits that has to pay DreamWorks for its software, which is not out in the market. It has to train engineers to use that software. It has to pay, presumably, again, this is allegedly, I don't know if this is true, but they would have to buy the $45 million debt, even though I think they used it as a write-off against purchase of the studio. It's this shit, right? It's Matt, you can see why I'm like, yeah, it gets pretty nasty up there in Hollywood. They would have to buy the debt, then reboot it all, then spend the extra 50 to get it done or whatever it will cost. And then Universal or Comcast, who own DreamWorks, would have a clause saying, and at the back end, if you make any profit, we take 50% of that as well. So
No one's taking that bet.
There's no bet. I mean, it's barely possible to make money out of animated film anyway. Your margins are tiny. Yeah. And just don't edit out the bit where I say I don't know what I'm talking about. But I think that's about it. That's the approximation. You'll edit all that out anyway because it's unbelievably uninteresting to anyone except us.
It's good enough for me.
Yeah.
I read an interview in Rolling Stone where you talked about The Artful Dodger, and you just seemed so pumped about how much of it there was a big budget film in Australia or a big budget series in Australia.
Yeah, beautiful.
You're really pumped about it. So talk about that and what it's like creating in Australia versus the US.
Well, so I can talk about when I first came back from the US and got into Upright, which I co-wrote with a bunch of people, many of 3 or 4 of whom I'd known for years. It was so joyous. And making Upright, filming Upright, was one of the best things I've ever done. So Australia, everyone in Australia is as good as anywhere in the world. I mean, Groundhog Day is running in Melbourne at the moment, and there's absolutely no gap between the level of excellence in every department, in costuming and stage management and even the producerial side, let alone the actors and so. There's no gap. It's not like Broadway's here and Melbourne, Australia's down here. It's completely world class. We're potentially better because we work really freaking hard and we're not so interested in the politics, right? But I mean, no, not better. It's just that there are amazing artists all over the world, amazing practitioners here. But yes, we don't have the population density, so we tend not to have the budgets, but that's all changing. Artful Dodger, I had nothing to do with. I just heard about it. And this, again, is an absurd place I've ended up in, given my origins as an actor were problematic. Like I said to my manager one day, why doesn't everyone send me scripts? Like, I showed I could act in Upright, and I've been in big Hollywood flop film, and like I can act. Why don't Australian producers send me scripts? And he's like, well, everyone thinks you're just your perception in the industry is that you're an auteur, that you're doing your own stuff. And could you change that, please? I'd love to just be able to do a gig where it's not all my freaking problem. And I said, for example, I've just heard from Gracie Otto that she's directing on The Artful Dodger, which is like 1850s, set in Australia, like Dickensian spin-off. I'm like, I'm born for that shit. Why aren't I? And he went, really? And I went, yeah. And so like that afternoon, the producers go, you want to be an Artful Dodger? And I'm like, oh, yeah. So I just taught my way in. And it was just beautiful. The budget, the production design, that's where you first see the cheapness, Production design's amazing. The lead 3 actors are incredible. And then a supporting cast of just top-end Aussie talent, Damon Harriman and Susie Porter and Jess DeGowan, me doing my fucking thing. And it's like, it's joy. Yeah, it's great. It's a good time. The trouble is, there's so much being made now. The problem is you just keep the quality up. and the writing in Dodger, Perth boy, James McNamara, is just, it all comes down to the writing being good, really, in the end.
And so, what's the state of the Australian screen industry right now?
Oh God, I'm the wrong guy, man. I mean, I happily just sort of wait for someone to tell me I'm allowed to make art. But it looks good to me. There's a weird thing. Streaming has 4 years ago, you could get sort of anything made, and it was really expansive, and everyone was like, you know, if we're going to compete with Netflix, we got to make The Great, you know, or we got to make, you know, Breaking Bad or whatever. I mean, that's earlier, but and now it's like done some weird regress where everyone's like, right, we're not spending money on weird stuff anymore. We just got to make cheap, super mainstream stuff. And they literally say it to your face. I'm saying this because my new TV show, I can't sell it. And they're like, yeah, we just want really cheap stuff that everyone will watch.
Cheap as in production
Yeah,
budget,
yeah,
or cheap
yeah.
as in
Yeah, my new idea is a rock star in the Enlightenment. So it's period piece, so it's expensive.
yeah.
And I'm not a big enough star to pull the money that would need at the moment. But in 2 years, it'll all change again.
Yeah, okay. And how have you seen the difference between the screen industry in Australia and the music industry in Australia, which you've recently really dived into with your record deal with BMG? What is the differences like that here?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I'm so in a sort of bubble. I really don't. I just, you'd be shocked by how little I really understand the record industry here. I mean, I put out my record. We did a live streaming thing at the beginning of COVID. I think we were pretty much the first and last Aussie act that tried to ticket a live. Do you remember that? In the first few months of lockdown, everyone was trying to ticket live streaming events, and Kylie did one, and that Korean K-pop band did one, and like there were like 10 of them, and I was one of them. We spent freaking $200,000 trying to, and
They're not cheap.
and we ticketed it, and we made our money back. And like the week after that whole idea just went boosh. No one likes it. I'm proud of what we did, but it was a weird time. But I wouldn't know, you know, I don't know what being on the charts means in Australia. I don't know what record sales means anymore. You know, I'm agitated on behalf of some of my friends that streaming earns you so little money, but I don't care about that because I'm a live guy, because my records are always just going to support my live audiences. So yeah, I don't know. Ask Heath.
So we will get Heath on the podcast soon again, but who is the managing director of BMG?
BMG, yeah.
Can we talk about comedy again? Because I know you said you haven't done it in 14 years. Now,
I mean, that's not quite true.
I know what you mean.
My
but
back tour was still a comedy tour.
Yeah. But like, I guess more broadly speaking, I've heard you reference things that, you know, you don't like punching down in your comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, as you progress through your career and you get bigger and bigger, I mean, who's not down anymore? I mean, you're at the top of your game, right? So, I have two questions off the back of that thought. Is that one the big motivation why you kind of pull back? And two, isn't it also anti-comedy to think that way? I mean, by putting people in classes like you're up, you're down, you're therefore saying they're not equal, and surely there is no protected class. Everyone should be treated equally. Everybody should be able to, you know, have a joke and be made fun of, and therefore makes everyone equal. By having a protected class means they're not equal. And so it feels anti-comedy, that kind of sentiment to me.
Okay, it's another hour. I think it is a kind of coincidence that I pulled away from comedy as I got to a point of power where some of the stuff I was saying would be less, would seem less. You know, I made my name really like in the middle of the new atheist movement. I was a pretty good pianist singing songs about death and God, and like it was pretty atheisty, and I was pretty known globally as a part of that movement. Apart from anything else, the comedy was almost, as it happens, I was funny. I mean, I played on huge stages in the Washington Mall for the Reason Rally, you know, this huge American sort of, not anti-religious, but pro-secular march. so those ideas, the new atheist movement sort of collapsed, and I think questioning religion couldn't be more important than right now. It's just sort of become untrendy. Religious identity has been pushed down the list after other identity categories that we are more interested in tackling. And I'm like, okay, that's what's happening socially. That's cool. And I've had some opinions in that space, but so yes, I think comedy is zeitgeist, right? The reason I found such a big audience is no one was like me, quite, and that's great. And I wanted to get out before everyone's like, oh, yeah, that guy who does those things. And I did. I really believe in getting out before your audience stands up to leave, you know. As for punching up and down, there's absolutely no doubt that I think culturally we've gone too far down the path of thinking that by observing in the world averages that we should apply that to individuals, right? So depending on who you are in terms of your race or your gender or your sexuality, or the only one we don't talk about is socioeconomic groups, but we'll get back there. Marx will rise again. By noticing these inequalities on average, we've gone, therefore, when I see a person from that category, I'm going to assume that they belong to that average. And that works both ways, obviously. I'm going to see a person in this identity category and I'm going to think, well, that's an oppressed person. And I'm going to see a dude in that, and I'm going to assume they're an oppressor. And that is a misunderstanding of how data works, because, of course, humans are distributed across curves, and you shouldn't ever make an assumption of a person based on their identity. And to that end, it is infantilizing to assume a group will be too sensitive to a joke, because you're assuming that the individuals in the audience, the queer people or the neurodivergent people or the people of color in this audience, I'm going to assume that those ones are too fragile, but these ones can take it. And that's just bad maths. However, the idea that by acknowledging those inequalities across averages in populations, the idea that that thing that I just stated, that it is infantilizing to treat people differently, is also not quite true, because all this shit is always complicated, despite the fact that everyone pretends it's not. And so you want, for example, in our industry, affirmative action, and you want to maybe get rid of some of the racist jokes we used to do back in the 50s, and you want to maybe consider more what it feels like to be a person with achondroplasia or a person with autism or whatever. But at some point that becomes condescending and reductive, and it reduces humans to their phenotypes and their attributes, when actually they're complex monsters and you can't predict what they want or like. So it's tough. The thinking can go to, well, we shouldn't have a voice in the Constitution because we shouldn't treat people differently. And I don't agree with that. I think we should have a voice in the Constitution because Aboriginal people have had a different run at it, you know. So no easy answers, I'm afraid.
No, I think you've actually articulated that tension really well. There is the argument of just say what you want to everybody and fuck them because everyone's equal, and that's what comedy is. And then you get the other comedians that are like, no, there are certain people you shouldn't joke about. And I think you've articulated that kind of neither are right. And I think that's an interesting perspective.
You've got to be good. You've got to be good at jokes, and you have to make sure it's clear to the audience that what you're laughing at is bad ideas. And I could construct a joke that laughs at dickheads in the social justice movement. I mean, there's no doubt there's incredibly shit behaviour at both ends of the political spectrum by people who have black and white thinking. And I'd love to do some comedy about dumbass social justice warriors performing their virtue, their moral purity on the internet whilst doing bugger all in their lives for anyone. But I can't win because I'm straight white, you know, blah, blah, blah.
You might win at the box office.
Yeah, I might win at that. Well, yes, exactly. I could win in ticket sales because everyone's desperate for that. But I also don't want to be part of that battle. Like I got other tools, right? And I got out of comedy a long time ago in its purest sense because I was just less interested in comedy than I am in other ways to spread good ideas, to put good fun ideas into the world. I think Matilda's done more for the world than all my pokey. Well, you know, I had when I was my last cancellation, my last time I got piled on a few months ago, the week my mum died, which was fun. I had the most extraordinary thing, and saying this will probably get. I'm not in the internet. It got me off social media finally. And there's no way to tell this story without sort of sounding very self-serving, so just accept it as a self-serving story. I was in the back of a quite nice car, being picked up at the airport, and I'm on the phone to a friend who's been at the end of some pretty big public shaming things, going, what do I do? Do I speak? Do I just shut up? Do I put out a statement clarifying what I said? Do I correct the record? Blah, blah. And I'm crying because I've had a really bad week and there's thousands of people saying absolutely untrue stuff about me because they love it, because people love it. They fucking love it. Oh, yeah, fuck that guy. And the driver stops and lets me out. And he said, I just want to say I grew up in Iran and I went to jail for a couple of weeks when I was 13 and my parents got us out of there. And then we were in Turkey. And when I arrived in Australia, I saw your university speech and that opened me up to you. And you taught me how to question my beliefs. This is a ex-Muslim guy. Being an ex-Muslim guy is tough. And I'm got hundreds of kids on the internet calling me a bigot and an Iranian guy crying in my arms. And I thought, I can't, this is too hot. It's too fucked. It's like, well, no, what I thought is, what matters is this guy saw my work. This shit, I just need to not be a part of anymore. I've spent years trying to tell people about the dangers of black or white thinking since before Twitter existed. The Fence was written in 2009. We divide the world into terrorists and heroes, into normal folk and weirdos, into good people and pedos. I've been saying the same fucking thing about black and white thinking for 15 years and I'm out. I'm fucking out, man. I'll put it in my work.
And that's a super interesting lesson. We got a room full of young students and
fucking young people.
You know, we can.
You know what the young people all think? They all think this. Yeah.
No, well, we can talk to them as future artists, right? And this is how, if they're going to create art that is going to challenge the current culture in whatever way, this is the shit you're gonna have to deal with, and this is the reality of it.
Yeah, and what's hard is not to land. So, I mean, if I can say anything useful about art and politics, I guess is where we're tiptoeing, is that you don't have to be part of a gang. You just don't have to wave a particular flag. And I know I'm saying that from a point of privilege, and I know for some people waving the flag of their particular struggle is unbelievably important, and we all need that. We need artists to rise up, to tell the story of what it is like to be. That is what art is for. We tell stories to engender empathy in one another, and we love it. Humans are fucking gorgeous, man. We go to the theatre, we read books, we go to the cinema, not partly because we like seeing our experience reflected on screen, but I think more because we get a buzz out of empathy. We get a buzz out of seeing not our experience reflected on the screen. We love a story of like, oh my God, I've never really thought about what it might be like to be that person that this wonderful artist has represented on screen. So telling your story if you come from a place where you're not represented in art is just vital. I just don't think, I just think it's incredibly important to understand, and this seems so simple, that the reason we can function as a population of artists and humans is because we walk alongside people we just fucking do not agree with. We abhor their values and we want to fucking scream, and we feel offended. We feel personally disenfranchised by their beliefs, and yet walk alongside them we must, and let them make their art we must, and let them have their political views we must, and let them lecture at universities and fight them on the basis of information, and fight them with art, and fight them with storytelling, and fight them with beautiful marches and movements and love. But we mustn't, as artists, think that the way to move forward is to have a monoculture of a set of didactic beliefs where anyone outside them is persona non grata, because you might be fucking wrong.
Round of applause for that. We're gonna.
And I might be wrong about all that as well.
I'm gonna fucking frame it. We've got 3 students that we're gonna give you some questions, and
Yes.
then we're going to wrap it up. So let's get the first one away.
Tim, when did you first become involved in entertainment, and how old were you when you started performing?
What was my first thing? I mean, you know, a couple of school plays, but I wasn't the kid who got the good roles in the school plays. And I was briefly captain of as a boy soprano, I was captain of the Year 6 choir, but I was kicked out of the choir in Year 8 for not turning up to choir practice because I had a detention for not turning up to choir practice. But I guess somewhere in there, I started doing youth theatre, and I wrote my first score for youth theatre at 17. It was songs for a youth theatre production of Love's Labour's Lost. And that was the thing that made me go, oh, people really like those songs. I made people cry. And then gigs, then piano bars and wedding bands, and for years. And yeah, little bits of acting and stuff. So I haven't really worked in any other. I've not earned a living outside of music since I was about 19, which I'm really proud of. But I certainly, so that's 10 years of really joyous, underpaid work in lots of different fields just to hold on, just like write a thing, do a gig, go on tour with a cabaret chanteuse to Port Hedland, and, you know, like playing a wedding band, and just gigs and shows and writing. So yeah, so I've earned a living as an artist since I was 19, which I can't quite believe, really. I didn't really believe I was a muso till I was about 25. Still wonder.
Over to you.
Okay. Hi. I can't have myself. Sorry. I'm also from Perth.
Hi.
Rock on.
Fuck yeah. Best.
So obviously collaboration is such an important part of creating work and getting it out into the world. But as a young creative myself, I'm really trepidatious of it. So how do you deal with, or do you deal with, letting other people into your work and kind of releasing part of your control over that and not having it adhere perfectly to your vision?
It's a really good question, and I don't know. Because what I had this real split in that I have this high self-esteem, low self-esteem, or high status, low status thing that I think we all have. We all like to, we kind of all assess ourselves as, I'm either this or that, and you're just a mess, right? I mean, there are times I think I'm just brilliant, and there are times I just can't fucking look at myself, you know? And I think artists do have, I mean, saying I have a sort of fragile self-esteem feels so stupid and reductive, but it's really weird, you know, being able to get up on stage in front of 10,000 people and say whatever you want, and then wake up the next morning just feeling like, why does my wife like me? You know, like it just does that to you. It's a bit, being an artist is discombobulating. So I only say that because your self-belief is fluid. And so although I was like, oh, maybe I could play in a piano bar, like I wasn't like, I'm going to have my name in lights. Another part of my brain was like, where are the brilliant people? Because I've worked with brilliant people, but I thought there would be more. When I moved to Melbourne, I was like, I'll get in a cover band, because as if the Malthouse Theatre or MTC are going to want to work with me, because there'll be a million me's. And I went, oh, there's a few, but there's not a million. Okay. And then I went to London. I'm like, well, here I'll really struggle. There must be a million me's. And so part of me was waiting for Matthew, really. So Matthew Watchers directed Matilda and Groundhog Day. And I got the greatest gift of my life is I never found a bandmate. I never found McCartney to my Lennon. I never found someone I could write with. I found Matthew. I found this theatre maker with whom he's the opposite type of person as me. And we just love working together, I think. I hope he does. He doesn't express himself very much. So part of it is about finding people. Sorry for the long answer. Part of it is about finding the right people, and you shouldn't beat yourself up if you haven't, and you shouldn't force yourself to compromise your ideas. But in this stage of your life, just realizing that you're still on a journey and you're not as good a creative as you will be in 5 years, and this is the time to test the boundaries of your self-belief and to be self-critical and to let other people, and then go, that I would have been better off just not listening to that. But you've got to learn those lessons. You've got to get a balance between self-belief and hubris, Yeah, you have to find a balance. Again, your vision might be wrong. How do you know? You'll know when you find someone that you really, really want to work with. But if in doubt, give it a crack and then take the lesson. I don't know when you start just going, fuck it, it's me. It's my way or the highway. I'm pretty controlling. Or at least when I believe something, I find it pretty hard to let it go. And I'm very good at convincing people that my idea is best, even if it's not. It was a useless answer.
Hi, I'm a huge fan.
Thanks.
My question for you is, how is the process of composing for a musical different from writing all of your other songs?
It's actually not that different. When I wrote Matilda, people were like, how did you suddenly write for kids? You managed to do that whole musical without saying cunt once, And I'm like, it's not a compulsion. I use swear words as a color. That it's just a color, right? So it's not that different. The difference for me in writing my satire or even writing my not funny songs is that category is like, what is something I observe in the world that I think would be interesting to unpack in a song, that I think would be fun to unpack in a song, that is either from my perspective or a slightly adjusted perspective. It's often like me, but not me, In a musical, the different is what the prime mover is, what the intent comes from. Not so much, there's huge differences in musical form in a way, because when you're writing a song in a musical, if you're good at it, it should be the whole musical should feel like a symphony that relates, and Groundhog Day is better than Matilda in that regard. But the intention is about who sings what when, right? And actually that's probably the thing I'm okay at. I'm probably a better who sings what whenner than I am a songwriter. I'm quite good at seeing a story and going, if that character sings about that, then that'll illuminate that character's journey. It will say something about the story, and hopefully it will say something about us as people, as audience members. So you're aiming for a different thing. And then the other big difference is you're imagining what it's, once you've made that decision of who sings what when, then you're putting yourself in someone else's shoes, which is the greatest joy of making art. Just like it's the greatest joy of watching art. It's an act of empathy. It's like, okay, I'm a human, they're a human, but she's 6 and she's a girl and she's a genius and she got brought up by abusive parents and she's angry and she's being shouted at. How is she feeling? What would she need to unpack? Where does she get to? And I fucking love that. It's such a beautiful job. So what's motivating the song is the main difference. Then the rest is just your tools and your limited palette, my limited palette.
Tim, I think everybody will agree here at JMC. Thank you so much for coming and joining us and sharing this.
Pleasure. Thank you.